It's July 14, and Jeannie and I are going to talk about beauty culture, but specifically about beauty culture in the context of beauty as aging and also beauty as currency. And this topic is very close to our hearts. We've been chatting on and off about it, texting each other. And we do want to start with the disclaimer, like we did in part one of this conversation, that this is all about our lived experiences. We shared a lot of vulnerability and we were pretty raw in sharing our own experiences around beauty last time. And Jeannie will give us a little recap. But I just want to emphasize that we're not here to judge how you define beauty or define beauty for you or redefine it for you. We're just sharing what we think of it and how we experience it as middle-aged women.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Mansi. So, Monty and I were talking after our first live, which happened a couple of weeks ago, and we realized that there were all these little rabbit holes we could kind of go down with this conversation, different sub ideas or subtopics, and a couple of the ones that occurred to us that we might be able to speak into a little bit more based on our lived experience happens to be pertaining to being middle-aged women and this whole idea of aging, and then also the idea of beauty as physical currency. So when my daughter Felicity joined us for the first conversation, she really offered this textured viewpoint from a teenager's perspective, which is obviously very different for Monsi and me coming from a different generation and also from different cultures. And so it's helpful. It was helpful to me, at least, to be able to incorporate Felicity's viewpoint on what it's like to be a teen girl and the kind of pressures that maybe are a little bit different than what Monsi and I have had to deal with. But particularly surrounding the idea that women in general feel this incredible pressure to conform to a particular type of appearance, and that appearance itself is almost like this model or display of our worth and our value.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of where Monsi, I wanted you to kind of share with everybody to begin this idea of beauty as physical currency. And I really like the story that you shared about, especially about your hair. So could you maybe start with that?
Yeah. So just before we went live, I was telling Jeannie about my lived reality every single day where my husband, who is literally 10 months older than me, telling me that I need to fix my hair. And when he says fix your hair, what he's referring to is the gray. And I haven't dyed my hair now since October. I had not dyed my hair during COVID because, COVID. I've had white hair since I was 19. So I've literally been dyeing my hair since I was 19. It's just something that runs in our mother's side of the family. And so it was always, you're 19, you're not supposed to have a gray crown. You're supposed to have like luscious, thick black hair because that is so symbolic of Indian beauty. And so it was always henna at home before chemicals came into the picture. And then ever since then, it's been like, $250 every 6 weeks to maintain my appearance, which when you add up over the number of years, how much money have I spent just maintaining how I look for other people? It's an inconvenience for me. It is a hassle to drive to this particular person who uses this particular kind of organic dye because I don't want to get all these chemicals. I don't want to expose myself, and yet I keep doing it. And so when COVID happened, I stopped, obviously, because none of the salons were open. And around the same time, I also was feeling very sick. This was in 2021. I had to undergo many tests, and we were planning a trip to Jamaica in 2022. And I went to a wig store and I bought a wig because I wanted to feel joyful. And that to me was the lowest point of how much my physical appearance was not just for others, but as a definition of my own happiness. And you start questioning. And I got treated differently when I had this beautiful burgundy bob cut wig that I spent $375 on. And the lady there, when she looked at me, because I was frail, I was sick, I was undergoing all these tests, I had gray hair, very short cut. She asked me if I was a cancer patient. And so, there's so many layers. Suddenly you realize that, oh, I'm not. So should I not be buying that wig because that's for cancer? Like, it's all of that. I'm so shallow. I'm so vain. And yet I feel happier. I look happier when I put that on. And I want to have a nice trip. And so for those 5 days in Jamaica, I wore that wig every day. I felt I was treated differently. And it wasn't just in my head. My daughter observed it too. She was 8 at the time. And she's like, people are being really nice to you. And like men are smiling at you. And like, she noticed those things. And we came back from that trip. I donated the wig. I had it cleaned, washed, donated it. But then it really made me think about the why behind this. And it's hard to have this conversation because it exposes me and my vanity to everyone, right? It's not easy to say, yes, I am vain. Yes, I worry about how I look. And I sat with that for another 2 years before finally in October I decided, no more. I am done. There was no one particular moment that led to that decision. There's a fighting back that happens every single day when my husband says, fix your hair. Every single time we go to a gathering with Indian women and they say to me, you're just letting yourself go, like you're not taking care of yourself anymore. And it's interesting to not fall into that trap again and say, okay, I'll get an appointment and get this fixed, or I'll be who you want me to be. But simply say, you know what? It's my hair, it's my body. I'm happy like this. And I actually don't use any product anymore at all. It's like wash and go, just like for my husband. And that's the thing that it's like he can do that. He can wash and go. Why do I have to worry about taking care of this and maintaining a look that makes other people comfortable? But it's, again, coming back to the reality that, we have to have that honest conversation with ourselves. It wasn't just always about other people. It was also about making me feel comfortable about myself. And why is that?
So I have so many thoughts, but you should two things specifically. And one is that I actually wrote a pillar post about hair
Mm.
not long ago that I posted on Substack. And I kind of did some research about why is this whole idea of our hair and losing our hair turning gray, our hair falling out, why is this such an intimate and personal issue where people end up feeling very devastated and even grieving that? And so I really delved into some of the cultural reasons, historical reasons, the way that people have been humiliated by their hair being shaved off or chopped off, um, and how hair conveys a particular portrayal of beauty. It does. And so that was the first thing I was thinking of was this whole conversation surrounding hair. That could be a whole other subset.
Mhm.
And then I was also thinking about this whole part that you were talking about, Mansi, about vanity. You said this was hard for you because it's exposing your own vanity. And I think that that term vanity can be a loaded term. And what I mean by that is that we tend to have our own opinions about what is vain and what is not. And at the same time, it's really about what's vain for me. And it's not necessarily going to be the same thing for you or someone else. I'll give you an example. So, some of you may or may not know, I used to be a branded Catholic author. And because of that, people often would email me or somehow contact me and ask me very specific questions about their lives that I really didn't feel was appropriate for me to answer. And the one that came to mind when you were talking, Monsi, was this 80-some-year-old woman who emailed me. And she said she had read an article I'd written. It was probably about vanity. And she said, do you think it's vain if I get my eyebrows tattooed on? And she gave some backstory, some context. Well, I have this medical condition where I just don't have any eyebrows. They fell out and they never came back in. And I really feel or I really worry that I'm being vain if I get them tattooed. And so gave me pause. It made me think about it. Like, wait a minute. You know, here's this 80-some-year-old woman who's asking me, half her age,
Mhm.
this is vain. And I felt a lot of different things, but a couple of the things I'll share is that it made me feel very sad for her that at her age she didn't trust herself well enough to know what was right for her and to basically say screw everybody else. I know I'm going to get judged. I know that people will have their opinions about it, but if I feel good about myself and if this makes me feel more like myself, then I'm going to do it. That was the first thing. I felt really sad that she at that age had not gotten to that point. And the other thing I thought of was, well, if she has a medical diagnosis and she's telling me this, it seems perfectly reasonable if she wants
Mhm. Mhm.
to go get this tattooed. And so that's essentially what I told her in my reply. But, I also mentioned to her what I said here. I said, what may be vain for you may not be vain for someone else. What may be vain for them may not be for you. And this is where it's really important to have that individual discernment and that quality of trusting oneself and one's intuition. And I think that we lose that as women because we're constantly bombarded from birth with all of these messages, all of these narratives about who we should be and how we should look and how we present ourselves. And it's never enough. It's never good enough. No matter what we do or how we do it, we're going to get it wrong somehow. And so eventually, at least for me in midlife, I came to a point where I was like, well, I'm not going to dye my hair. And it's because I don't have $250 to go to the salon.
Mhm.
I'm allergic to sulfates, so I can't get the chemical dyes, and I don't
It's,
want
oh
that.
my gosh, the itching that happens after, and I suffered through it for years. Ah,
So
terrible.
it was hard when I realized after I had my 5th child 5 years ago during COVID that I realized, "Oh, wow, I can see my age. I'm getting gray in the temple. I'm getting all this, salt and pepper hair. I'm getting these wrinkles." And at the same time, I kinda had to have this, moment of reckoning with my
Mhm.
and say, but this is the reality of where I am in my life. And this is where I want to seg into this whole concept of beauty pertaining to aging, Monsi, because I think that that's an important part of this conversation.
Yes. Yes.
So, what are your
What
thoughts
an
on?
honor. I just feel like, I have shifted. It's been a mind shift. It's been such an honor to have this and to flaunt it and to have my wrinkles and to wear a bikini with my stretch marks and not keep rubbing castor oil on it like I was told to. Because what an honor it is to be alive, to have had all these experiences that are etched in my body. I mean, we were just talking about Andrea Gibson passing this morning. She was 49. And it gives you perspective suddenly, I'm going to tear up, but it's like this person is so close to my age. And she no longer, like, does it matter whether she was beautiful or not? That's not what we're going to remember of her. And so I think it needs to be the framing needs to shift around beauty and aging. And I don't think that it needs to happen in midlife. I think it needs to happen very young with our children, where they understand that the physical appearance will keep changing. It will. There's no constants there. I look very different now than I used to look in my teen years. I look very different when I'm 70. But, and also I'm growing internally too. There's growth happening. There's change happening internally as well. But if we build that inner confidence, the way we see beauty, the way we emanate beauty becomes more than just physical. But what everybody else sees is just the physical aspects of it, which is what is so disconcerting, that we form so many first impressions, and everybody, the more we look at someone, the it's almost like it's instant. It's the first 2 seconds, all these biases keep flooding in without even that person opening their mouth. If I look at a person who looks old, as you said, I think it was in the pre-conversation, the frail, the quote that you were sharing. Why don't you go ahead and share that? Because I think that's important to discuss, to bring to light over here.
So, I was reading a book by Henry Nouwen called Aging. It's an old book. It's from the 70s. I had the original copy. And he was basically talking about how the elderly are often segregated from society because we fear them. We either stereotype them as being frail and feeble and helpless. They're kind of curmudgeons, right? They're rigid in their way of thinking, and therefore we don't want to be like them. We don't want to be them. And the reality is that we are becoming them. All of us are. And the tragedy that Henry Nouwen was writing about in his book is that when we separate and distance ourselves from the elderly and aging population, we're really doing a disservice to everyone because we're missing out on sharing in relationship and walking alongside people who have been where we are now and impart some type of wisdom or gift to us, just as we could also slow down and spend some more time in the pause because they are physically slowing down, right? And so it does tie into this whole idea of aging and beauty because we tend to look at the elderly and their appearance and think, oh, I can't look like that. And so what do? Because we're terrified of death and we're terrified of mortality. And we don't want to confront the reality that each of us is dying every second we're alive. We try to conceal it in some way. We try to get the fillers and the hair dye and make ourselves think that we're younger than we actually are. I also like what you said, Monty, about how you're like, I'm going to flaunt it. I'm going to flaunt my graying hair. I'm going to flaunt this body that has the stretch marks. Because I was thinking about how when I had Sarah and I had a C-section with her, and what an embarrassment it was for me. I have felt for many years that I've had to hide that scar.
Mhm.
And part of it now, is I'm thinking about how that scar tells a story. It tells about what I've been through. And it also tells a story of my body's strength, its capability, and what would happen if I actually learned to love that part of my body. And so it's almost been kind of this strange wrestling for me as I get older of letting go of my youth while also appreciating all of the beautiful things that my body has done for me in my life, no matter how it looks, even if I don't like the way it looks or I don't want it to look the way it does, but just appreciating its strength and its stamina and everything that it's withstood, all the traumas it's endured. So I don't know if that's kind of where you wanted me to go when we were talking
No,
about
that's it's interesting. When you were saying that too, I was reminded of this image from all our beach vacations and all these years where I have worn the one-piece suit that has those tight panels that kind of flatten your stomach, right? And I don't really, I'm a size 32B or whatever that means for a bra size. I haven't worn a bra since I stopped nursing Mira because they're just constricting and I don't really need that kind of support. So I don't, but again, it's that curvaceous, that figure, the 32, 24, 36, whatever that is supposed, that standard that we're supposed to meet. With sagging breasts, with a big floppy belly, having produced however many children our bodies have produced or not, the bloating that comes with perimenopause and menopause, and all of those other things that we undergo. I don't understand. It feels so trivial to want to cling on to this youth, It just feels just such a small thing. Like why do we give it so much importance? And why are we in a culture that celebrates so much of what is irrelevant in a way, instead of focusing on the humanity? And why is it always women? When you go to a beach, you see all these men in these beer bellies, it's like they almost look pregnant, some of them, honestly. They're having fun. They're not worried about, hey, do I look as classy or as, I don't know. I'm not speaking for all men. My husband doesn't care. And neither do his friends. They're just playing beach volleyball and having a good time. And on the other hand, you see all these women looking at other women's swimsuits and commenting on body types and adjusting their, bras and their swim tops and whatever to make sure they have the right cleavage and that they look attractive. And I really, it has always bothered me, and I don't want to contribute to that culture. Tiffany says my husband cares. Well, good for him. But it's again, we're talking about our own experiences here, and your experiences will be different. But I think overall, generally speaking, in society, there's so much value given to external experience, and so much is robbed away from women as they age because of how they start looking at a certain age, and just feels unfair.
I also think, Vansi, that, when you asked the question a few minutes ago about why does this happen? Why is this happening? I think it's very subtle. It's very covert. So,
Mm.
example, after we had our first live about beauty, so it was kind of fresh in my mind, it was within like a week of that. My daughter Felicity had asked if I would take her to Sephora because she had a gift card or something and she wanted to get some concealer. I don't know, something. So I'm standing kind of like on the edge of the store and I have no desire to get anything there. And it's not because I don't use any products at all. It's just that when I look at or just kind of casually browse, it's shocking to me on so many levels. First of all this stuff.
I'm sorry. The doorbell rang. I just need to answer it really quickly. Ollie, who is it?
I did hear her dog. I heard Ollie's barking. So
Okay, this is the reality of a life. My cleaners are here unannounced.
I have to lock my door because my kids might need something, so that may happen. It's all good.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to interrupt your thought. Go ahead.
You're fine. I remember exactly where I was. So I remember being on kind of the edge of Sephora, of the store, and I was looking, just browsing casually, what's out there. And the products were so astronomically priced. And there was like all of this emphasis on like hyaluronic acid and collagen boosting, and this is anti-aging.
Mhm.
And then of course, like all of the selection within that particular brand was so overwhelming. So, what is that message? What's the message that we're receiving, even absorbing subconsciously? That's my question. Because even just standing there, I could say to myself, "Wow, this is absurd on so many levels." But I could also walk away kind of feeling this twinge of like, I don't really wear hyaluronic acid and collagen and boosting things and anti-aging. I just wash my face every night, put a moisturizer, you know? And it has and what I use has no chemicals. It has essential oil. I mean, it did make me stop to question for a moment. So I think marketing has always played a role
Yeah.
in this message of women's beauty and value. And here's my 14-year-old daughter who I'm proud of her for the first session that we had saying, "Hey, I'm not gonna wear heavy makeup. I do kinda wanna, put some mascara on and put on some
Mhm.
blush." We let her do that, that's totally fine. But it's just it's really this constant bombardment, I wanna say,
Yeah.
Monty, that we receive constantly.
And the thing is, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, well, what about my grandma? Because my grandma used to use bentonite clay on her face. And she had like this egg wash thing that she put in her hair or in my hair as I was growing up. We had coconut oil. Like it was all natural stuff. And what was the purpose of that? Moisturize, keep your skin healthy, keep your hair healthy. And it didn't have that messaging of this is to keep you youthful. It was more of this is how you nourish your body inside and out. And I think that's what we've moved away from is that why are we doing this? Are we doing this to nourish our body and, not keep our skin supple so that we can look younger, but just take care of it? I think that's what it boils down to. And I think this shift happened in our parents' time. And now it's just, all over social media.
Why do you think it happened in our parents' time? I'm curious to hear.
I don't know. I think women started going to work. That's what I think happened was when my mom started going to work, she became much more conscious of how she looked, how she was perceived, whether or not she was perceived as a figure of authority. And for that, she had to wear heels so she could look taller in a room full of men. She had to look presentable and sharp. And that's where the makeup started coming into the picture. So I don't know, maybe it has something to do with that. I'm sure there are lots of studies and anthropological research on this in different countries and different eras, but I think it has to do a lot with women trying to be perceived of as not less than
Mm,
men.
yes, yes.
Whereas
So
if you think about it, the irony is that men don't do any of that stuff,
that's
right?
like it's quite the opposite if you think about it. We hear about the middle-aged man being distinguished and suave, and his salt and pepper hair is considered a hallmark of his maturity.
Or the
And
beard. Yeah.
yes, yes. And so it's almost like men become more desirable as they get older, whereas we as women feel like we're kind of has been, or we're discarded,
Mhm.
we're um, erased, if we don't maintain this particular standard. And so my mom did not work outside the home when I was growing up. She was a school teacher before my brother and I were school aged. And then
Mhm.
stayed home. And I remember her kind of padding around the house in sweatpants and a sweatshirt, and she didn't wear makeup during the day. But the thing that the message that I actually internalized back then, which I think it circles back to what you said earlier, Monse, about we need to start instilling these messages in our children from a young age. The message that I internalized was just be hygienic, like be clean. Oh, she took a shower every morning. Her hair was not disheveled. It wasn't like all over the place. She didn't have anything on her face like food or anything. She brushed her teeth. And so that's the standard that I always chose to maintain. Even when I went through periods of my life where I felt especially insecure about my appearance and I really tried hard to fit in and look, I don't know, beautiful, sexy, whatever. But most of my life, it's really been more about, you know what? If I'm clean, then I'm presentable and I'm fine. And so that was really when Ben and I had 3 daughters in a row. That was really something on the forefront of my mind was how am I going to communicate not just by what I say, but what I don't say and how I live? How am I going to communicate to my daughters that my appearance and our appearance isn't the most important part of who we are? And that's another reason why I've chosen to stay away from, unless it comes up in conversation, the concept of weight and body size. And when on occasion, it has come up where my kids are like, whoa, so and so is really fat. And I'm like, well, how do you think that might sound or feel if you were that person? Wouldn't that be hurtful? And then we talk about, everyone is shaped differently and everyone has a different body size. And then we talk about, well, Felicity's tall and I'm short. And so that's something that's different though than when I was raised.
Yeah. And it's just, it's interesting too, because these conversations come from school. They come home from school. And so sometimes I'm taken aback where we're watching something on TV and Mira will say, like a TV show host, Brijesh and she watch a lot of TV, like game shows. And so they're watching that and suddenly Mira will say, oh, it's just an old woman trying to look young. And I'm going, okay, that's an interesting observation. Tell me more. What made you say that? And she's like, she's putting on bright red lipstick and she has a really tight dress on and she's trying to flatten her stomach and she has such high heels on. And, she'd be more comfortable if she was just in a pair of shoes like that man, the other host, who's wearing a suit but is wearing flat, like he's not wearing heels. And yes, he also has, I told her about when I used to work at NBC and the health reporter, because I was her intern, would spend an hour and a half doing her makeup before she went for the broadcast. And to me, that was like, you're reporting on a health issue, but you have to spend 90 minutes doing this to look presentable. The men also had makeup on, but the news anchor, the main anchor spent 15 minutes. And all he did was spray, do a little concealer, and off he went. The woman, on the other hand, is busy curling her hair and all that stuff. And so Mira notices that and she, points it out. So I'm glad in a way that she's noticing it. I'm glad that she's calling it out in that way. But it's also interesting because these conversations come home from school sometimes in a way where I don't know how to respond to it. Because I don't want to be like, this is not your choice. I do want you to think about why you want to get lip gloss, for example. Who is it for? Is it because you want to, hydrate your lips? Well, we have coconut oil for that. But to have a conversation around it, and she obviously doesn't want to be the kid of a hippie because she has said a couple of times that other moms think of me as a hippie because of my hair and how I just show up the way I am. But I'm like, I take that as a compliment because I don't have the emotional, mental, physical bandwidth to worry about how I look. And I really, frankly, don't care. Because if you know me, and you want to hang out with me. And if you're just going by how I look and you're going to pass judgment on that, I probably don't want to hang out with you anyway.
And then I'm thinking too about how these conversations come up with certain people or certain crowds where it seems like everything is centering around keeping up appearances. So there was a really close friend of mine in high school, Rachel, and she ended up marrying this guy who was really, really into brand names and certain trends and hairstyles and tanning when it was actually, and it wasn't detrimental to one's health or known to be. And every time I would spend time with them, I wanted to talk about what's going on in your life? And hey, how do you think about this issue? Or whatever, naturally would come up in conversation. And instead, it was like they would parade me around their house, pointing out this latest gadget or fixture or piece of furniture. And then they would also say where they got it, what brand it was, what it's made out of. And it really started to feel phony and superficial after so long. Boring to me as well, like really boring. And I actually said to my friend Rachel at one point after several months of this happening, I was like, I don't care about what you have. You could live in a house that's like just average or below average, and I really don't care. I just want to come see you. I don't it doesn't bother me if you got all of your furniture at a secondhand store because we do. We have lots of hand-me-downs.
Mhm.
And she looked at me really perplexed, like this was the first time she'd ever heard somebody say that. So I almost feel like there are also these circles and
Yeah.
cultures, I want to say.
Where it matters.
Yes, yes, exactly. But for me, having always been a really deep thinker and a really deep feeler, I want to be with a person for who they are. And I want to be able as my real self in those conversations and relationships. And I want to feel like both of us know we belong. Without having to conform or fit in or look like a carbon copy of everyone else.
Right.
Felicity, there's one more thing I'll say about that. And Felicity, when she was in 8th grade, there was this clique of girls who befriended her but didn't in 7th grade. And in 8th grade, they all became what I called saltines. So I'll said that. But Felicity would get in the car after school, very disgusted, very indignant. And she'd say, Mom, they all were wearing the exact same hairstyle and the same exact shoes and color of shoes. And they had the same lip gloss on. And I was like, if they're not confident enough to look like themselves and be who they are, then that to me that speaks of their insecurity. And I said, "Would you rather be a flavorful vegetable cracker or do you want to be a bland saltine?" So that was just the
Yeah.
analogy or the metaphor that came out of my mouth in the moment, impromptu. But she, from that point on, used it, like, throughout the school year. Whenever something would come up where Felicity was starting to feel a little bit like, I don't know if it's okay for me to be me as I am because I'm different than everybody else is in this group, then she would say to me, "I don't wanna be a saltine, Mom."
Mm.
And I don't know why that image just kind of sticks in my mind, but I think of what a tragedy it is to live in a society, to live in a world, that only values people based on what they look like, what they own, how much they're worth monetarily, and really about image, I want to say. All of this kind of distills into this idea of image. And it is not a true reflection of who we are, of our
It's, it isn't a reflection of our humanity at all. And it's also, I do want to be careful about, because I always wonder, when you have this, like this example that you shared with Rachel, I always wonder because I have many of those examples in the neighborhood that we live in, surrounded by multi-million-dollar houses. Our house is very modest compared to everybody else's. And they don't show off in that sense. They're mostly very nice people, but it matters to them. And I've always come back from those conversations wondering, but never, because I'm not so close to them. But if anybody has that perspective, I would love for you to share in the chat. Why does it matter to them? I've always wondered about that because it's easy for us to say it's their insecurities, but what are those insecurities? Where along the line did they gather those insecurities? What happened to them as children? What were they exposed to? What were they protected from? Or sheltered from? What kind of life did they have growing up? Because sometimes I see in these reflections in our neighborhood, it's new money. It's people that came to Silicon Valley and, they came from very modest households. And suddenly they have a chauffeur and they have 2 nannies and they have a chef, not a cook, a chef. And that's how it comes up in conversation. They're not going to say, oh, my cook is going to be coming. They will use the word chef. So you know that that's a chef. And I notice that stuff. It's very subtle. It's not in your face. It's not like I'm bragging about this, but hey, I want you to know that I have a chef. And it's the same thing with the makeup. It's, when you were talking about the saltines bit, it made me think of the parallel of what we're seeing on Substack in writing, the AI generated stuff. Everybody's the same. Suddenly you see that in the feed when you're scrolling. Same thing when you see the reels. It's the same template. It's the same cookie cutter. Everybody, because I don't know if it's easy, because it's comfortable, because it's much, much harder to flow against the current. But where does it end? Because it's not just constrained to beauty. It's not just constrained to how we look. It's how we are in the world. It's how we walk. It's how we talk. It's how we interact. It's that humanity that you were talking about. Beauty is a very small part of it. And it's the part of it that you see instantly. And the other thing that we were going to touch upon is beauty as currency. I was used many times as a teenager, being the prettiest one of the bunch, to get free stuff. My friends would why don't you go ask? He'll give it to you for free. Or, you'll get an extra whatever because you're pretty. And all you have to do is, bat your eyelashes and just give them a smile. And it's that sense of, I used to feel abused, and I didn't do it most times. I did it a couple of times because it made me feel good because, hey, he did it for me, he won't do it for you kind of thing. But it fell apart pretty fast because I was like, why are they doing it? I don't like it. It just feels icky. But yes, it's true. And I see that sometimes when Mira comes home and she'll talk about, the coach picking so-and-so girl because she was wearing these kinds of shorts and this kind of shoe, and she looks taller or she looks prettier or her hair's tied a certain way. So the dance teacher, that might not be true, but that's what she feels. It's that image. It's that idea of that person looked prettier, that person looked taller, and that it wasn't about the skill, it was about how they were perceived.
Absolutely. Well, perception is an undercurrent in everything, right? We all absorb particular opinions, ideas, beliefs based on our experience in the world and how it's shaped us. And I also think, Mansi, that when you're talking about beauty being a smaller discussion point in this much broader idea of who we are, the idea of self or identity, I think that the influence of economic influence, I'm going to say, of productivity and consumerism has very much formed this definition of what makes a human valuable. And I say that because right now I'm working on what might become a video series. I'm not exactly sure, but it's basically about what happens to us when we become helpless, because all of us are at some point in our lives going to become helpless, meaning incapacitated, recovering from surgery, disabled, aging. There's all different kind of scenarios where we find ourselves not being able to do the things or be as independent as we once were. And when I was doing the research for that, I realized that historically, it really stems back to this whole idea of industrialization and this whole concept of the human as consumer and the human as the producer. And when no longer are valuable or functioning in society, then we lose that sense of who we are because maybe we've attached our identity or assigned it to our appearance, our job, our home, the neighborhood that we live in, the fact that we have a chef. There's all different things that kind of contribute to what might make us feel more secure and more safe. And it certainly goes back to that question you asked of what are those insecurities? Where did this originate? What happened to us? And I think that when we don't know how to tune into ourselves and tap into the deeper, more existential questions and the pain that we all carry, and we're not really attuned to ourselves, then we don't know how to answer that. We don't know why we feel like we have to keep performing or we have to keep up appearances. We just know that we do it because it temporarily makes us feel better. But then we always end up feeling empty inside. And I really think that that's problematic in general in our society and our culture because most people, especially now, don't know how to tune into themselves. They don't know how to pay attention and they're not self-aware. And it's increasingly difficult to do in a culture where we're constantly bombarded with stimulation.
Yeah.
Especially through our technology. Everything is instantaneous. Every single person has an excuse to avoid their internal pain because all we have to do is click on whatever on our handheld device, right? I mean, that's true for all of us, myself included. There have been times where I'm like, I can't handle this. I'm just going to numb out, right? And so I do think that this all contributes to this conversation about beauty. And I think beauty contributes to the conversation.
It does. And I think it boils down to one thing that I have struggled with and I have become aware of in this past year, most especially with my hair, because, outward appearance has elicited responses, very verbal, very visceral responses. And I think what it boils down to is our fear of rejection. That's what it boils down to. We want to feel accepted, which is why we want to keep up appearances, which is why we want to hang out in circles and talk about chefs and chauffeurs and, the latest Sephora product that we're using. Or I get my products from Japan or from Korea because skincare products there are much better, whatever that conversation is. Instead of, I have coconut oil, I have castor oil, I have, whatever clay that I can harness from our local farmer or, use the earth that it's right there in our backyard kind of thing. Why not do that? Because we don't want to be the hippies, because it really is that. You don't want to be the outcast. You want to feel like you belong. And I think what I keep coming back to is it truly a sense of belonging that I will feel? Because I have been there, done that, tried it. And I keep coming back to that center of, why do I care so much to be accepted by people who, even if they do accept me, I will still feel that sense of emptiness and loneliness? Going to your point of that loneliness is within. And so unless I heal that and go to the root of why I'm feeling insecure about how I look, why I feel the need to put mascara on before I go to meet the women entrepreneurs of Los Altos, but I don't feel the need to put mascara on when I go to pick up Mira from school. What's happening there? It's pausing, it's reflecting, it's noticing, it's asking myself those questions, letting go of those ideas of acceptance, and finally embracing who I am for what I am and being okay with it. But not everyone has the time to do that, or the wherewithal. It's hard work. It's a lot of hard inner work.
It is hard work. I think that we make the time for what's important to us. And I think that time being something that we all tend to use as a reason why we do this or we don't do that. When I think about the grand scheme of my own life, and I think about what I want my life to mean or how I want it to matter, it does really contribute to how I cultivate my time. And I'm not saying I'm always a good steward of my time, but I try to be. I try to look at each day as, okay, how can I be the best version of myself today? And when I'm not, how can I repair and reconnect to the people that I may hurt because I'm exhausted or I have a migraine or I'm irritated and I don't have time for myself in the way that I need. And that's, again, it goes back to this idea of our common and our shared humanity. And when we're talking about these questions, these existential questions of why does it matter? Why do I care? And also the issue of belonging, Monsi, that's huge because I really think that it's ingrained in every human to want to belong. But we've really distorted what belonging really is.
Mm-hmm.
We have substituted a cheap facsimile of that in fitting in. And we can look at our adolescence as a prime example of that. We might say, "Oh, I have this friend group of 5 people and we all belong," but belonging is a definition based on, are you doing what the whole group is doing? Is group think present? Are we all on the same page about who should be excluded because of whatever reason of the day, right? Or am I being celebrated for my differences, for what I contribute in a unique way to this community or this group of friends? Is that being upheld and valued and acknowledged as different than somebody else's? and noticing that there is strength in diversity. And so I think about that a lot because we're raising neurodivergent children. And so my kids and our family, we do not conform to the societal standards and norms. I could go in any community. I can go to my church, I can go to the ballpark, I can go to our school, I could go to a neighborhood barbecue, and we will not feel like we belong if that particular community's idea or version of belonging is of conformity rather than of celebrating differences.
Right. And I also will say that the days I put on makeup, the days I dress up and wear a bra and what is that called? A corset? That's what
Yeah,
it feels like, Sometimes when I'm wearing the pantyhoses that have that tight waist panel, I don't feel like I'm less of a deep thinker. I don't feel like I'm a shallow person. So this is not to say that people who do that, women who do that, are shallow.
right.
We're not trying to label. We're not labeling that but that's the impression one can easily get if one subscribes to that kind of conformity and rejects the other aspects of it. When you're always showing up as that mannequin at every single, because I have my days when I do that, and I have my days when I show up like this. It's both. And
Same.
people know me as both,
Same.
But when you show up always as that one persona and not as the person, I think that's what we're talking about here when it comes to our struggles with how beauty is perceived.
Hmm. Hmm. When Ben and I took Sarah as a baby, she was about a year old. We took her to a craniofacial conference in
Mhm.
Orange. And I think that was one of the first times in my life that the stark contrast of what is beautiful and what is considered ugly was just thrown in my face. Because when we walked the streets, again, I'm going back to what I said earlier about this covert underpinning or undercurrent, this very subtle message or narrative. It's not necessarily something that people say, it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
so we're walking around with Sarah and a bunch of other people who are older adults with similar craniofacial condition, the
Mhm.
diagnosis. And we go to this mall and seriously everybody did a double take who walked past us. They would stop in their tracks and
Mm.
make this big production of turning their heads, gaping, gasping, eyes widening. And I hadn't thought about how this particular group of people we were with was that ghastly
Mm.
to the rest of the world. And I think that when you grow up in a culture that really puts this emphasis on external appearance, you do really notice when it's not there because you haven't necessarily been exposed to or maybe intentionally exposed yourself to a whole constellation or variety of what will look like and how all different shapes and sizes and colors and abilities exist in the world. And if you don't become familiar and actually befriend people who don't look like you, then it is going to be almost a threat, I think. That experience for me as Sarah's mom and also as friends of adults who have Apert syndrome was very impactful because I realized that if it was that painful for me and I look pretty normal, what must it be like for those who don't and who have to live in their bodies and with the faces that they have every day and not know what kind of reaction or response or questions that they're going to be pelted with when they go out in the world in public. So, a big reason why this conversation is so important to me is because of my daughter, Sarah, and it's because of all of my children. And I think that because all the other four children live in a family where Sarah is celebrated, and we do celebrate each one of our differences and gifts and talents. To them, Sarah is just Sarah. And they only know that she looks different when we have an experience in public where she cries because someone calls her a witch, or they run away because you look scary. And that's when we have those conversations. But I truly believe that my children are going to go out in the world when they grow up, and they have an advantage over many of us because they know Sarah, and they will be more attuned to people who are different, and they will have. So to me, it kind of does it, all of this kind of blends together, talking about beauty culture, but it blends into this whole idea of self-acceptance, of empathy, of celebration. At least for me, I find that that's kind of my biggest takeaway, so to speak, from kind of what we've been sharing today, Monsi.
Yes, and I completely agree. I mean, we saw a kind of a snippet of how amazing your kids are when Felicity spoke with us last time, and how, I was blown away. And we saw that in the comments that you received on the post after you shared the recording, of how people really felt that sense of her being grounded. And I think that's the biggest gift that we can give our children, whether they be girls or boys, is to have that sense of self-worth that does not depend on how their appearance is, because your appearance is going to change.
Right.
But that sense of self-worth, if you have that from a very young age, it's not going to go away. It's only going to become stronger. And I feel like I discovered my worth last year at age 46, where I am now stepping into who I am with full confidence and zero apologies. But it took that long. And I didn't have that growing up. I didn't have that in my 20s. I definitely was figuring it out in my 30s. I think I got a voice from becoming a parent to Mira. I still remember when they first brought her to me. I know the typical reaction one is supposed to give is, "Oh, that's the child I bore and she's so beautiful." My first reaction was, "Oh my gosh, she looks like my father-in-law."
Yeah.
I made that face and I said that. And my husband's looking at me like, "What?" But that was my honest to gut reaction. It was like, "Oh my God, she looks like my father-in-law. Like, what am I going to do with this child?" But it shocks you. It's like, you say that out loud and then it shocks you, because then you're like, "But wait, I'm not supposed to say that." And the whole supposed to, it comes back to that idea of, we're supposed to look a certain way. We're supposed to age gracefully. We're supposed to wear these clothes at this age. We're not supposed to be flamboyant in our 70s. We're supposed to start wearing neutrals. What the heck? Who made those rules? I mean, it just aggravates me, all of this. It's like, we get one life and we're spending so much of our time on this, what I will call nonsense.
Yep.
Because at the end of it, it's just noise.
Yes.
What did you do today to connect with another human, to ask them how their day was going and really be interested in their answer, not just say it as a form of greeting? What did you like when Mira comes home? Yes, we talk about all this stuff, but our day ends with, "So what did somebody do for you today that made you feel good? What did you do for someone today that made them feel good?" Have those conversations. Yes, of course, so-and-so wore these shorts from Target, or so-and-so had her hair in this kind of a braid. That's important stuff too at that age. But I think we have to keep reminding them that there are bigger conversations that matter more, and that will take them through life. The mermaid braids are going to come and go. The hot pants are going to come and go. Fashion trends, all of that stuff. I mean, denim is making a comeback. Who knew? The cut-off jeans and all that stuff. But it's so interesting to me that we put so much time and energy into all of this, instead of, ultimately, who knows how we're going to die. Everybody has this utopian thought that they're going to be old and frail and on a deathbed surrounded by their relatives, and they'll have this chance to reflect on their lives. I always go back to, today could be your last day.
Right.
You might not have a chance to say goodbye to all your loved ones. Is mascara the last thing you want to be worrying about?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. It's a mind shift. I think we just need to have, and not blackballing anyone, not saying, this is the right way to live, this is the wrong way to live. I'm just saying, you get one life.
Right.
You choose what your priorities are, what you want to spend your time in. At the end of the day, what matters more than anything else is to do what brings you joy, but to know why that's bringing you joy. Is it because it's truly bringing you joy, or is it because you think you're supposed to feel joyful from that. And I think everybody knows the answer to that. All of us do. We're just not brave enough to say that out loud.
It goes back to a phrase that you used in the very beginning, Monsi, which I think is a very good way to close today, about remembering that it's a privilege to be alive. And if we remember that every day, I think that it does shift the priorities. And that doesn't necessarily mean I won't put on mascara. I will put on mascara, but it means that the things that I spend most of my time with focusing on are going to be meaningful to me. And they're going to be exactly answering those questions that you ask, Mira. What happened to me today, and what did I do today to bring goodness in the world that made me feel joy? And I think that's a really good way to kind of end our conversation, because, beauty really is about all these things. It's about joy. It's about embracing our humanity. It's about celebrating differences. It's about honoring our aging bodies and faces and the ways that we change. It's about being honest with ourselves and admitting the darker thoughts that we might have about appearance. And so I think that that's a really good way to kind of leave our friends thinking a little bit more and digest this conversation. But did you want to ask
I
closing?
was just going to say this is an ongoing conversation. I know we've been framing it as a conversation around beauty, but for everyone who's witnessed this, whether live or will watch this as a replay, the takeaway probably is that Jeannie and I will never be boxed into the title of a conversation. It's very organic, and it will touch all different aspects because, we're all multi-layered and multi-complex beings. And Jeannie and I like to talk about all those things because, we're not living in silos. It's not just this, one thing. It's the one thing in the context of everything. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. And Jeannie, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you.
Wonderful. We'll do it again, Monsi.
Yes.
Thanks,
Sounds
everybody.
good. Bye.
Bye.